So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it. So before we get into today's video, I want to give a shout out to a must read for any Christian. It's the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Lewis is a brilliant ex-atheist intellectual. He became a Christian and actually one of the greatest defenders of the faith. He brings a brilliant yet easy to read and understand depth to the Christian faith. His book is really not specific to any denomination, but rather explores the ideas that generally unite all Christians. It's really a must-read. If you have never read this book, go to Amazon right now and look up Mere Christianity and either get an audio or a paper copy today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's show. Excited to do this episode. Today, I'm having an interview with Craig Klein. Craig, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Craig is a professor of social work. And where are you a professor at?
At Shepherd University in Shepherdstown, West Virginia.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, this is a very interesting episode. So one of the things I do for the audience is I'll release videos and people make comments, and I sometimes interact with people that are making comments, and Craig had made some comments on my video that was titled A Letter to a Gay Latter-day Saint. And he had some pushback on some of those ideas. And so what I like to do with people that I believe are bringing genuine and thoughtful critique to the table, I often will invite them to come onto the show to discuss it and, try and steelman their position. And so that's kind of what we're going to do today is I'm going to try and steelman what Craig's saying, and then we'll start to discuss maybe our differences after I'm sure that I understand where he's coming from. Now, before we get into the actual topic of discussion, Craig, do you want to tell us a little bit, give a brief background on you?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So as you already mentioned, I'm a professor of social work at a small public liberal arts college in West Virginia. And, prior to this, I was practicing social work primarily in the world of child welfare and child maltreatment. In terms of my religious background, so I was born and raised in the ODS church and stopped attending, I would say, probably somewhere between 4 to 4.5 years ago. I would say that I stopped believing necessarily in some of the truth claims of the Mormon Church prior to that. So I stuck around for quite a while after I no longer believed in some of the truth claims. But yeah, for a variety of reasons, community being a large one. So I do try to keep myself connected still to kind of what's happening in the world of the ODS Church, because I do have an interest in religious identity, spiritual identity, and kind of the intersection of religious and spiritual identity and sexual orientation and gender identity.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. So you're coming at this from someone who was born and raised in the church, but no longer is active in the church, but that is still very much interested in sort of this intersection of the church and these sorts of issues dealing with
and not just the intersection of these things with the ODS church, but also other faith traditions and belief systems as well.
Awesome. Well, let's kind of get into the topic. So I had made a video, and in this video, it's something that I had spent quite a while thinking about and coming up with. If someone came to me who was a Latter-day Saint who also experienced same-sex attraction and said, hey, came out and said, hey, I'm gay, whether it was my son or whether it was someone that I had stewardship over in the church, what do you say to a person, in that situation? And that was what my video tried to address. And there's a lot in that video. So if people haven't seen it, they probably would want to go watch it before they continue this interview,
Yeah.
because we're going to be talking about some of that. But I wanted to find out from you. So you wanted to give some pushback. You said that there were some ideas that were problematic, and I want to hear about what some of those are. So give me your feedback.
Yeah. So let me. I think I want to start by saying this, that because I have spent time reading the comments section, and I want to be mindful that there are people who are gay and lesbian and remaining faithful and active in the LDS Church. Like, that is a real path that some people choose to follow. So I don't want my statements here today to be misconstrued as seeming like they're taking away from someone's experience who is trying to navigate that path as a faithful member of the church and as a gay or lesbian person. Right?
So you think that it's morally good for a person, it's morally acceptable for a person to both be a Latter-day Saint and gay or lesbian?
I think it's acceptable for people to choose the path that they feel best meets their needs at that point in their life. Right. So what I'm saying is, if a person is gay and they're choosing to remain celibate because they believe that that is what's best for them, to remain celibate, stay active in the church, and continue on that path, and they feel that that is what is most beneficial for them in their life at that point, then yes, I would support that person in making that decision. They have the right to self-determination, and I don't want to say anything that would take away from that. But likewise, if someone chooses to leave the church because they feel like that's an untenable path for them, I do not want to take away from that either. I mean, I can certainly understand and appreciate that that is a choice that people may make, and many do make. And it's a perfectly acceptable choice.
Okay. So when, just so I understand what you're saying before I offer any pushback on it, it's basically like, if people want to stay in the church and they're gay, or they want to leave the church and they're gay, there's not any moral, neither of those choices is necessarily morally superior. If this is what they want, if it's their kind of self-expression is to be in the world in this way, then as long as they're being authentic to themselves, that is an acceptable thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. And I think obviously I can say that as one who doesn't believe in the truth claims of the church, right? So to me, I'm looking at it in terms of a person's right to self-determination, and their opportunity and ability to make decisions that they feel are best for themselves. And as someone, you're speaking for myself here, as someone who doesn't need the church to be true, I'm okay with whichever path a person chooses because it's their choice, right?
But you would say it's not okay for anyone to obstruct someone's path that they want to choose, as long as their path is not harming other people.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because we're talking about adults making adult decisions for themselves in terms of their own well-being, their own relationships, their own religious development, spiritual development.
So very much, would it be fair to characterize that as a sort of moral libertarianism? Maybe like whatever a person's path wants to do, as long as they're not conflicting with other people, then that path is morally justifiable.
Yeah, I mean, as long as they're not harming somebody else.
Okay.
Certainly they're not. We're not out anything, and they're not out anything, I don't believe, because they're trying to make the best decision for themselves. Kind of recognizing that people are the experts on their own experiences. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So go ahead and continue. What were some of the things in the video that you found maybe to be problematic? If indeed people are free to kind of choose what path they want, were there things that maybe in the video that were problematic in that aspect, that they didn't respect people's self-determination?
Sure. So I guess I'll start by saying that I want to kind of look at this in two ways, and these are more global, kind of overarching issues that I have with the letter. First, well, we can get into particulars, but first I would say that it's set up in such a way as, okay, someone's coming to me seeking some private ministry, some private counseling, and this is the advice that I would give, right?
Mm-hmm.
In theory, I think that's fine, except that it's a public document, right? It's a public statement. It's not a matter of private ministry because it's now been presented publicly. So if there's someone out there who is looking into these things, curious about these things, they can find all of this information. If I'm a member of the church and I'm wrestling with this internal conflict of my religious identity not aligning with my sexual orientation or my gender identity, we're talking here about sexual orientation. So if it's not aligning with my sexual orientation because my church teaches X about people who are gay, then I'm looking for information. I'm seeing something that's presented as private ministry, but it's very much public. And then there's a number of particular things in there that I would take issue with, that we can get into those particulars here in just a little bit, I guess. The other piece being, I think we almost need to back up a little bit to the youth letter. Now, I know that you don't read the letter that you write for youth, but it's there, right? It's there right before the one. And I think it's an interesting segue into the adult letter, because in the youth letter, I see a lot of, let's not worry about this too much right now, because this could change, and let's see what happens in adulthood. Mm-hmm. The letter to however this is phrased here, the open letter to a gay Latter-day Saint, is written more to someone who is an adult. Mm-hmm. But then once we get into that letter, I start to see this kind of can that's been kicked from adolescence into adulthood, and now we're going to pick that can back up and we're going to kick it into the eternities and say, God's got this, he'll figure it out in the end. Mm-hmm. That's an awful lot of kicking the can down the road.
Yeah. And I wouldn't necessarily say no to that. So the first thing I would say, just to kind of respond to that a little bit, is that in the youth letter, I'm dealing with someone who's under the age of 18.
Yeah.
In my opinion, under the age of 18, you're not going to be having sex with people. You should not be out having sex. And sex for a Latter-day Saint is within marriage. And so if you're not getting married when you're a youth, then this is not a subject that should be the focus of your time and attention at this time. And sexual development is something that happens over the course of a person's development, right? You have kids that come out as, trans when they're 12, and then by the time they're 16, they're like, no, I'm not trans anymore. Mm-hmm. And then you have people that, for instance, there's quite a wide spectrum when it comes to bisexuality, especially in women, to where there are varying degrees of that. And so what a person's sexual sort of proclivities are going to end up like by the time they reach adulthood may change. And so with that in mind, it's sort of like, look, right now, sexuality is not supposed to be the big focus of your life. And so you're tormenting yourself with trying to resolve something that doesn't need to be resolved at this point in time in your life. Allow yourself to grow up, allow your nature to fully develop. And by the time you hit adulthood, you've reached a much higher level of development. And at that point, you will have to confront what this means to you and what you're going to do about it.
Yeah, I think just to push back on that a little bit, though, I mean, having spent so much time in the church and my experience all through adolescence in the church is everything does tend to point to the temple, right? And we can't say everything points to the temple and ultimately eternal sealing. And it isn't, because it isn't just about sex and sexual intercourse, right? It's about relationships and relationship development, right? So if I'm 15 years old and heterosexual, I can go to stake dances and I can dance with the girls. And when I'm 16, I can probably start dating.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm gay, I better not go to those stake dances and dance with the boys that I find attractive.
Mm-hmm.
I better not start dating a boy when I'm 16. We're not talking about having sex. We're talking about normal adolescent development and relationship experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And on the one hand, the heterosexual youth can have those experiences. The gay and lesbian youth cannot, at
Yeah.
least not the people who they're attracted to.
Yeah.
And
we're
telling them not to worry about it, while at the same time we're saying to the others, we want you to be having these experiences. We're hosting these dances for you, right? So I think it's a little unfair to say, don't worry about it, when so much of their experience within Mormonism as an adolescent points to the temple.
Yeah, I would say all of our faith points towards celestial marriage and sealings.
Yeah.
I mean, that is very much the nature of what we're doing. And we do want, we're not a neutral institution where it's like every point of view is all equally valid. Our mission in the church is to get people to go to the temple and be sealed. And yes, in youth, we push people into that direction. Yeah. But the thing is that if you find that your feelings are not totally there, what I'm saying is all right, that's fine. Right now, focus on other areas and let's see how this plays out. Now that's in the youth letter. I'm very fully admittedly, I'm kicking this down the road because I say, let's figure out what you need to do and where you're going to go once you're an adult. Right. And obviously they're going to be uncomfortable because they're like, I want to, dance with boys or whatever. And yes, but the problem is that no, we don't do that. You're still developing sexually. And, that's contrary to the standards of the church and the commandments of God. And so therefore, I do say, let's move it down the road until you're an adult, but the rubber meets the road when they're an adult, right? It's one thing to tell someone like, hey, you're 15, let's wait 3 years to really start to have this conversation versus, it's let's not panic someone who's still in development mode until they're an adult and they're ready for these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, and I think just to be clear, and you're clearly, unapologetic on your position, and I'm equally unapologetic on my position here, that I just find it a little bit disingenuous to say to these kids, let's not worry about it, when so much of our focus and attention within the doctrine of the church is we're going to worry about it.
I wouldn't say don't worry about it. I would, maybe that's the wrong way of putting it. I would put something more along the lines of, let's see how this plays out.
Okay.
Like obviously right now you have, attraction to members of the same sex. All right, fine. Let's see how this plays out over time. Let's not start making rash decisions and labeling ourselves, or, in the case of like trans individuals, going and chopping your penis off. I'm sorry. Like we need to evaluate what the heck's going on here and slow down a bit. And then, but it's not to say that this doesn't matter. This isn't hard for them or whatever. It's just, let's wait until you're an adult to start to figure out what sort of sexual, path you're going to try and stay within based on how you're going to deal with whatever emerges from your developmental phase.
Okay. Yeah, because even because adolescence is, and we're not even talking again, let's just take the whole piece about sexual intercourse off the table, right? Okay. Anything that the LDS church would deem to be against the law of chastity, let's just even take that off the table right now. Companionship, intimacy, attachment, vulnerability, these parts of relationships that are all parts of normal adolescent development, we're saying it's okay for you, it's not okay for you. Well, for those whom we're saying it's not okay for, let's wait and see how that turns out. So there's a lot of development that occurs during that adolescent time period. Those experiences, that we have that make us kind of who we are going into relationships as an adult. And we're kind of telling this one group of youth, let's stunt all of that for you. The rest of you, it's okay.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that, just a steel man here, you're saying that these children are being denied the normal path of development that the heterosexual children are being allowed to have. And so it's like, all right, on one hand, you're saying you guys can have a normal path of development, and these kids with their normal natural feelings that they have are not getting to sort of have those experiences as they're growing up. And so it's important to confront it in their youth so that way they can have those experiences like other youth can, or resolve this, or whatever it may be. Is that sort of a fair representation of what you're saying?
Yeah, because we're saying that they're normal and natural experiences, right? Because I'm coming from a position that there's nothing odd or strange or wrong about being gay or lesbian.
Yeah. So that's exactly the heart of the issue. So
yeah,
I would not say that homosexual behavior is normal and natural development. We would say within the church that these are aberrations from the design that God has for us and his intention for his children. And so we do not want to encourage the development of those sorts of relationships, connections, and attachments when someone is in their early development. We say we actually want to stunt that development of same-sex relationships and things like that, and because those sorts of relationships are not divinely sanctioned relationships to exist in that way. The relationship between males and males and females and males are just not meant to be that way. So again, sort of unapologetically, I think a Latter-day Saint would be forced to say that, yeah, well, if this path of heterosexual relationship development is normal, I want to try to stop furthering the development of homosexual feelings and behavior. And while they're youth, these are still, you're a parent, you're a leader, and you're a Latter-day Saint. That's the position that we come from. And so we say, look, let's try and stunt this development now, and then allow for that development to sort that out when they get older. Okay, you're an adult now. At some point, you got to figure out how you're going to deal with this. We just say, let's not deal with it when they're youth. Let's stunt it until they're an adult, and then see what happens.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah. Okay.
And I think at the end of the day,
it's your position. I've stated mine. You've stated yours, and we're both kind of very clear on where we come down on.
Hey, if that's good enough. I mean, at the end of the day, I always say consensus is not necessary. Clarity is really what I think you look for in the different positions. Yeah. But to delve deeper into that, so here's something that I just from the very beginning that I think may be at the root. So if we dig down a little deeper, is you and myself have very different moral frameworks,
probably,
that we're bringing to the table here, because you have very much sort of what I described as a moral libertarianism. I don't know if you'd use that term, but it's the idea that, look, whatever a person does is morally legitimate so long as it doesn't harm another person, right? And so that sort of that is not the moral compass and standpoint of a Christian or a Latter-day Saint. And so if we're going to say, because really what we're having here is a moral conversation, like, is it right for a person to have a homosexual relationship? Is it right for people to be married when they're gay? Is it morally acceptable for teenagers that are gay to date? Is it morally acceptable for someone to have transgender surgery where they remove perfectly healthy breasts and a perfectly healthy penis, or have those? I mean, I would use the term mutilated and cut off. But the thing is that there's a difference in our moral perspectives. And one thing I'm curious about is, in what do you ground sort of your, when you say something is wrong, like on what grounds do you approach me and say, hey, that's wrong, and you're obligated to do otherwise?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I'm telling you that you're obligated to do anything, right? I mean, I can have a disagreement with
but
your.
Isn't it implied in when you come on and you say this is hurtful, this is problematic, this is that, you're implying that something is wrong with what I'm doing, and that it, I mean, you could just say, I prefer that you not do this and that you not make a video like this, but that's just, I'd say, well, yeah, you know, I prefer green, you prefer blue. I don't have any obligation to prefer blue if I prefer green, but there's an implication that my behavior should be otherwise, that I have there's some rule that I'm violating that I am accountable to.
Well, I mean, I think I can express a disagreement with your position and try to explain, I see it differently, and this is how it could be problematic, and this is how it could be hurtful. At the end of the day, if that causes you to stop doing that thing, right, then okay, great, that's wonderful. But if at the end of the day you still continue to do that thing, okay, that's your choice, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is my choice, but I guess my question is how do you determine what choice is the right choice and which choice is the wrong choice on a moral level?
Well, I mean,
yeah, and if it's all just a matter of personal preference, you know, I prefer to, you know, burn Jews, you know, you prefer to live in love and harmony with everyone else. By what standard do we say that one of these ways of living is right and one of these ways of living is wrong?
Well, I mean, I know it's just an example that you're throwing out there, but I think we would all agree that burning Jews is harming somebody else, and it's wrong, right? And living in love and harmony with other people is not hurting anybody else.
See, what's interesting though is that I would say that that's a product of Christian socialization, because if you go to, you know, the Roman world, or to the Aztec world, or to the Viking world, or to the Mongol world, universal human kind of everyone live in love and harmony was not the highest ethic. The ethics were very much based on conquest and dominance, and our tribe is best, and if you're not us, then we'll enslave you. And that was just the way that people viewed the world. Now, so what I'm saying is that yes, today, in today's modern society, we have generally accepted norms of behavior. But if you lived in Nazi Germany in 1944, you might have been just fine with burning Jews, and not only that, everyone around you. So is our morality simply the product of what the majority feels at a given moment, just some and it's arbitrary?
No, and I don't think you'd ever. No, I don't think you'd ever hear me say that, because, you know, I can accept and appreciate that we have, as a society, and this can look different in different places, but as a society, that we've adopted certain sets of values and beliefs and the way we treat other people based off of faith traditions, spiritual belief systems, be it, you know, Christianity, Judaism, whatever it may be, that those things have permeated collectively, you know, our sort of collective society, for the better, right? So no, I would never be one to say that this notion of right and wrong exists absent something informing that.
And I guess that's and I think, see, what's interesting, and I thought maybe our conversation would go here, because when you get down to it, if we're talking about something like what essentially the core difference I think that exists here between our points of view is that it's a question of morality. Is it moral for a person to engage in a homosexual relationship, right? In a sexual, and, you know, that I come from a perspective that says, no, it's not. And I have to then provide a basis under which I say that it violates some sort of a moral standard that the person is obligated to follow, right? That you have an obligation to not engage in homosexual behavior. And then on the other side of this, is the people say, no, it is perfectly morally acceptable for them to behave in such a way. And so at the root of it is this difference in, well, how do we determine what is and is not moral? And I think that, and so to dig deeper into that is kind of what I think I'd like to try and understand. And that is sort of by what standard are you using to judge if behavior X is moral or immoral? And or is it just arbitrary? And you're saying it's not arbitrary, and I agree 100%. But I guess my question is, but why isn't it arbitrary? Why isn't it just the social conventions of our time, and the social conventions of another time are just as equally valid as ours?
Sure. So, I mean, I think there's a couple of different angles we can take with this. I mean, first of all, we have people in the world who are gay and lesbian and living in relationships and getting in and out of relationships, just as we have straight people in this world who are living in relationships and getting in and out of relationships. And I don't view any of that as immoral, right? I'm not saying that a person who is gay and in a relationship is doing something immoral.
Yeah. And I guess my question is so how did you come to that determination? Like, what is the standard by which you're saying that this is moral, or this, like, if someone went and kicked a baby, you'd say that was immoral. But if you have a gay relationship, that's not immoral. Like, what is the thing that makes you say that, X is moral or X is immoral? Or is this just, hey, this is like, I don't like that, therefore it's immoral? And people may say that about us. They may say, look, you just think it's yucky, and therefore you say it's immoral.
Yeah. Well, because I'm not taking 8 passages from the Bible and using them to define somebody else. I'm not taking 8 passages from the Bible and using them to say 8 passages from the Bible that are quite honestly open for interpretation and have been widely misinterpreted. I mean, the term homosexual didn't appear in an English Bible until 1946 for the first time, right? There's a lot of history here and a lot of context.
Yeah, actually, and I actually want to get to that, because that actually is something interesting, and I actually have some stuff that I wanted to discuss with you about that, because I thought it might get into some of the scriptural interpretation. But let me see, is it? I'm gonna see if maybe I can steelman your perspective a little bit on this. It's because it really does come down to harm, right? Like, the reason that what we're doing is morally wrong is because it's harming someone. Would you agree that I mean, that seems like a standard that a lot of people use to judge if something is moral or immoral. If it's harming someone, it's immoral. If it's not harming anyone, then it's not immoral. Would that be a fair sort of evaluation of a metric, at least one of the metrics?
I think in general we can use that as a metric.
Yeah, and I would, and what's funny is I don't disagree with that. I think that harm is a good metric, but I think that if you accept the restored gospel, you would see that there is harm in not achieving one's highest potential. And if a homosexual relationship is unable to produce the ideal relationship, which we see as the ideal relationship being a male-female union that is able to produce children, that there is grounds to say that embracing that sort of that falls below the ideal. If the ideal is male-female union that provides for godhood, which is very much ensconced in LDS doctrine in Scripture, then is it not fair to say it, on the eternal time scale, it is harmful to enter into a relationship that can't reach that sort of divine potential. It's a path that doesn't lead to the highest and best ultimately. And in that sense, that's the way I look at it, that is what I would call sin, is when you choose something that's less than the ideal.
Well, and having grown up in the church, as I said, and spending 38 years in it, I understand that position quite well. And I can see that that's the conclusion that someone in the church might come to. My position would be that there is another way, and I would be quite surprised if 50 years from now this conversation doesn't look quite different. Just knowing the trajectory of change within the LDS church, I would probably be shocked if you came to me in 50 years and said the church doesn't allow.
Yeah, and frankly, there are people who make that prediction. Frankly, there are many people who make that prediction. The church will. Now, with that said, I also want to come back and maybe look at your perspective, or the perspective of, let's say, and I don't want to put you in the atheist camp because I don't know if that's kind of your thing, but when a person who doesn't believe that your existence is any longer than the 80-year or so period that you're going to have here on earth,
right,
and harm is the metric that you do, obviously the challenge and the suffering associated with trying to live a celibate life, and that makes no sense at all, because there is no eternal timeline. Sure. The only well-being you get to experience is the well-being of this life. And so when someone is minimizing your ability to enjoy the well-being of your 80 years, they're doing something wrong, right? Because so when you put things on this eternal cosmic time scale, and you put it within this internal, this bigger picture that Mormonism gives to us, it changes your premises entirely, and things that can seem like they don't make sense do make sense. But then it does come down to the truth claims. Is there actually an eternity? Does marriage actually last for eternity? Is the male-female union on the eternal time scale unique? Or I'm sorry, the highest and best, right? Like, if those things, so the disagreement, again, to create clarity here, really does boil down to if people actually believe in the doctrines that the church teaches. And what I see in the church, and that troubles me, is there are people within the church that act like you can have your cake and eat it too. That you can say, yeah, we can still have our doctrines and still remain faithful to what Joseph Smith and the scriptures and everything are talking about. Oh, and we can have this as well. We just got to come up with a creative way of interpreting everything that really doesn't hold much water, in my opinion. And that's one of the reasons that if the church ever were to embrace gay marriage, I would conclude that the church was a false institution of man, and I would leave. But you can't have both, as I see it.
Well, yeah, I certainly think there are people that continue to try. To be quite honest, I tried for too many years, right? To nuance my way into continuing to believe in things that I didn't believe in. And eventually I just had to put that down and say, you know what, this does not add up for me, and therefore I'm leaving. But people continue to try, and God bless them. I certainly respect that choice.
And I guess depending on the moral framework that you're bringing to the table, if you are, you would want any, but I guess is what I'm saying is, yes, you're cheering on the people in the church who are trying to undermine the doctrine, because those people in the church are undermining things that you think are bad and false, but they're in the church. And so my thing is well, wait a minute. You can't be in the church and undermining the things that makes the church what the church is. and that's something that I talk a lot about, because I think it
must be frustrating, right?
It is. Here's my thing. It's look, if you don't believe in the church and you don't support the doctrines of the church, I actually think that it's a problem if they remain in the church. And I don't say that from a point of like vindictive, like anger or whatever. It's that you're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole.
Right.
And it's just creating conflict for you and for others. And it's like, but I also would say that like, where are you going? If you leave the church, like, what is the nature of your new belief system?
Yeah,
And
I would say that there are plenty of noble paths. One of which is those who choose to remain in the church and try to make it a better place and a more welcoming place for people who maybe don't fit that LDS mold. But I also
do you think that changes something fundamental to the church? Because those people who are staying, who are making the church more welcoming, if they change the church to a degree that the church no longer is what it is, but then again, if the church is just a man-made institution, like a big social club that has some silly beliefs, from your perspective, it's like, yeah, make your social club different so that it, is nicer to people or whatever.
I don't know. I wouldn't call it a social club. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think I respect the belief system enough to say that it's deeper than that, right? And you would certainly agree with that.
Well, I guess but my thing is why? Why would you think that it's anything deeper than a bunch of people getting together and making themselves feel good and partaking of Marx's opiate of the masses?
People don't, how do I want to put this? People make meaning from many things in their lives, but people might be on a bowling club or a bowling team, which is a social club. It doesn't offer the same depth of meaning to someone as their religion.
I guess I get, but see, that's
unless they really love bowling and that's their faith, right? I mean, I don't know.
But if their meaning is all made up on a bunch of fairy tale nonsense, that ultimately is just a bunch of smoke and oakum by some dude who wanted to have sex with a bunch of women and lied about a golden Bible and all the rest of it, it's like, this is kind of absurd. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of like the kids who are playing make-believe outside. It's like, yeah, let them play make-believe. But at the end of the day, they're a bunch of kids playing make-believe.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, and I don't know. I mean, I feel like I feel like in some ways I'm finding myself arguing for your position at this point, right? When it comes to faith and belief and religion and spirituality and these things, I mean, meaning making and creating religion, for lack of a better term, existed before Jesus came onto the scene.
Of course. And
it existed, I mean, from a Mormon framework, it has existed outside of, before 1820. So, but these things are part of what we do.
Kids have played make believe ever since they've existed, right? And the idea is that, but see, there's a difference though between are we playing make believe or is there actually something to this? Now, obviously, I come from the perspective that there's a ton to this, but if there isn't something to this, then are we just biological machines? Essentially chemical reactions playing ourselves out over time and space, and eventually it just all plays itself out. The Coke can fizzles and then it stops, and that is essentially the deepest meaning of what humanity is.
Well, let me ask you this though, because I want to understand here. Would you say that the Catholic, and we'll just come at this from a Christian perspective here, that the Catholic or the Presbyterian or the Lutheran is just playing make-believe?
No, because I believe that there's an actual God in heaven and there is an actual meaning to this earth, and I believe that they are approaching it. Okay. That they are getting close to it. But if I were an atheist, if I held that there was no God and that fundamentally we were just matter in motion in space that eventually was going to play itself out, well then it's all make-believe. It's all nonsense. And any sense of meaning making is just an evolutionary evolved thing that you can't even control because you don't have free will. And so my thing that I do a lot is one of the reasons that I'm a Latter-day Saint is because I tried to go down the atheist hole. Mm-hmm. And as I went further down the hole, I was like, dude, this is not the reality that I inhabit. I'm not a meat computer. Like, there's something to this. And that, from there you can build up and find, okay, well, maybe there's some notion of a higher power. Maybe I have a soul. I don't know what that means. Like, what the heck does it mean to have a soul? But it seems a better description of reality than to describe me as a meat computer.
Yeah. And I would, I've never gone down the atheist hole, to be quite honest. I mean, I've, anytime I even ask myself, well, am I an atheist? Would I be an atheist? Is that something that I would consider? No, it's not. And I think for me,
well, and I think that's what grounds your moral intuitions, is that you recognize that, there are right and wrong answers to moral questions.
But that's not to say that I know plenty of atheists, both personally and professionally, who have a strong moral grounding. Now, what they attribute that to is entirely up to them. I don't know.
That's very much my point. You and I agree that an atheist can be moral because we actually have a standard by which things are moral or immoral. My thing is, if we're just matter and motion, like they would say, I'd say, on what are you talking about? Things are moral or immoral. We're just, we don't even have control over our actions. They're determined by the laws of nature, which determine the biological chemical processes that we're just going through. You don't even have free will. How can you talk about morality if you're going to reject free will? People don't even choose what they do. And so it just creates this absurd world. And so with the atheist types, my thing is that but I go down that rabbit hole and it just becomes super absurd. It doesn't match the reality that I experience. But that begs a deeper question, right? So then you move into the world. Okay, if you're not an atheist, if there's something, quote unquote, to this, well, then what? Now you're in this, you literally are like, you're searching for God or some sort of a God notion, some sort of a bigger picture to all of this. And then that's when, morality as a concept, as I see it, really only becomes relevant as you flesh out those sort of, let's say, quote unquote, theological ideas, because intrinsic to morality and the morality that we all talk about, it says that there are right and wrong answers. And if you don't ground that in something transcendent, then I don't know. I have a very hard time sorting it out. So the whole reason I'm bringing this up, this whole rant I'm on right now, is because as I evaluate a critique of someone who's coming to the table, bringing a moral critique to what I'm saying in that letter, I'm wondering, I want to understand the basis of that moral system so that I can evaluate if the moral system is indeed valid. Then from that, I can say I can agree with that person. But I think the actual fundamental difference between you and me and all the other people who disagree on this issue, which is a moral question, is that we're all coming at it from a different moral philosophy, an implicit moral philosophy. And that's what I'm trying to understand, when I interact with people. Anyway, I'll let you give any thoughts on that.
Yes. No, I mean, just kind of get back to the topic at hand here. I mean, having had the experience of seeing, and interviewing and speaking with and interacting with people who are gay and lesbian in deeply committed relationships in settings of faith and Christian settings, that's impactful, right? And it makes you realize, at least, it has for me, that all of these things that are said about people, all of these limitations and restrictions that are placed on people because of who they are, in terms of their sexual orientation or their gender identity, that we're imposing those. That is not that does not seem like something that a God, should one exist, and I choose to believe that one does, and leave it at that. That's not something that God would impose.
So
On his own creation, I think you
that's,
raised the question here yourself, right? What kind of monster would do that? And
yeah, no,
the question I put back to you is, oh, well, tell me, right? Tell me what kind of monster,
yes,
because that's the one you believe in. I think that wasn't the most gracious question.
So no, that's a great question, and I think it's at the heart of the issue. See, what's interesting here is that you and I now come to this table very different than I would with an atheist, because we both say, okay, if there is a God and you choose to believe that there is one, and so do I, well, now we're talking about different versions of God. We're talking about, okay, so who is your God? What is his nature? And why does your God oppose or approve of this behavior? I would come and I would have an explanation for that, right? And so as I approach this subject, my God was manifest in the world in the person of Jesus Christ. And obviously I can tell you there's a whole story of all of that and what's going on. And he has authorized servants, and like, I'm a Christian and I'm a believer that the gospel was restored and all that kind of stuff. And so this is one of the things, like, you and I mean, it's fine. Like, you very explicitly, like, my conception of God is not your conception of God. So we fundamentally have different religions. Right. What I don't understand is that people who have my fundamental religion are out there saying that, like, coming to a conclusion that's just totally not consistent with what our religion is. Now,
well, I would say I won't cut you off. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, though, that for a Latter-day Saint, gay marriage isn't possible. Okay, it's not like marriage is not it's defined as a union between a man and a woman by God explicitly. And I mean, we could go into the scriptural case for why that is and all that kind of stuff, but as a Latter-day Saint, here's the way I conceptualize it, okay? God is trying to help all of us to reach our highest and best potential, okay? To go as high as we can and closer to the ideal, to conform ourselves to a celestial order of being, okay? That's the whole point, to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man, translated as to conform yourself to a celestial order of being in the universe. Okay, on an eternal timescale. We have been taught in our theology that the highest and best relationship that can exist between two people is that of a celestial marriage. It's the union of the masculine and the feminine, and in that union, they're able to produce offspring. Anything short of that sells you short of the highest and best. It is not that God is punishing anyone. The punishment that is used, and I actually believe that it is used very much in sort of I believe that punishment comes as natural consequences of eternal law, which exist outside of God. Long discussion with that. But the idea is that God is not a monster who's punishing you for being gay. He is someone who you chose to come into a fallen world where anything could happen. Same-sex relationships are one of those things that anyone can be born with due to the fallen nature of this world. And you got to deal with that the best that you can. And if you deal with it the best that you can, then you'll be fine, as long as you keep your faith in God. And you will eventually reach your highest and best potential. But it simply is a fact of reality, in my opinion, that to not be able to have children is like, the work of God is the work of creation. We become co-creators with God. And so to not take the masculine and feminine natures and to merge them together into the creation of a child, to not have that ability. Like, there was a time when I thought I couldn't have kids. And that was a big thing for me. It was like, That was a major, like, I thought, well, that's a big difference in my life. This is obviously less than ideal. Every single person who embraces a gay lifestyle has to face the fact that they will never have biological children. Now, that is not a product of people being mean. You can have the most loving, wonderful people around you, but you have to face that reality. And when I look at what is the ideal objectively, I say to have children is a higher level of being than to not. And just even on the order of biological reality, to not have offspring stops your ability, the work of biological creation. So even if it's just on that level, but the difference is that a male and female who are, infertile in this life, they've been promised that in the resurrection that all of these things will be resolved. And so within our, but obviously you don't believe in a resurrection from the dead. And so when those sorts of things are taken into account, you can understand that it isn't God being a monster. It's just the nature of reality itself. And we want to help people rise as high as they can. And honestly, and I've said this, you have to do your best. And I don't know what that's going to look like, right? Like, doing your best, like, I fall short of all sorts of ideals. Every ideal there is in the gospel, I fall short of in some stupid way because I suck. And I'm no different than a person who's gay and, they decide to enter into the gay relationship because being alone is just too tough. It's like, fine. And like, I'm okay with that. I don't necessarily, I won't call it moral, but I won't call it it deviates from the highest and best, which is the moral path. But I would say, like, hey, if that's the best you can do, like, I'm not judging you if you don't judge me for all the ways that I'm imperfect. But I'm not going to say that is perfect, that is glorious and fine.
Sure. Yeah. And I hear what you're saying. I think, and obviously, I mean, you're presenting the position that a faithful, believing Latter-day Saint would present, right? And obviously, I don't come from that same position, which it kind of gets us back to where even presenting that position and then the statements in your letter, some of what's in that letter in the framework of that position is pretty rough, to be quite honest, right? So if we're saying, kind of like you do sort of at the end of Trent's story, we've got these, I don't remember exactly what all you kind of framed there, but essentially people are born with all sorts of things, and there's tragic accidents and cancer and muscular dystrophy. So basically we got like a really tragic accident and two diseases and being gay.
Yep.
Well, there's no equivalent, right? In my mind, being gay is not the same as being in a tragic accident or cancer or muscular dystrophy.
How's it different?
Right. In we're talking about diseases and an accident and being
so you
gay.
can't so you
I
don't
wouldn't
have the ability.
say
So if you don't have the, like, okay, let's use obviously those are extreme examples, but let's use a more minor one. I'm not able to have children, let's say. I'm infertile. Okay. Is that would you classify something that as something that's a loss? That's a negative in some way?
I don't see being gay as a negative or as a loss. I mean,
you're right,
I think this is another one of the fundamental differences.
But I would
there's being gay, there's being
but my question was
there's being bisexual, there's being straight. I'm not going to say there's being gay and there's not being able to have children. There's being gay and there's having cancer. There's no.
Well, what I'm saying is that I guess this is kind of what I'm getting at, is that I'm using these categories to say that there are things that happen in this world that cause us to not be able to have kids or not be able to do X, Y, or Z due to the nature of the world, because the world is less than perfect. And I think, objectively speaking, to not be able to have children is a deficiency. And so you may say, well, I never really wanted kids in the first place. I'm going to have sex with men and this is all good. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Fine, fair. You can do that. But from my perspective and from the perspective of a Latter-day Saint, I don't think that is, I think that something has been lost here. Like, I think there's a reason, I don't think it's just bigotry, that people don't like, oh yeah, like I really want to have a gay child, right? I think the people that are that way are crazy. People generally don't. And I don't think it's just the social stuff. I think it's because you recognize that there are things, there are aspects to a homosexual reality. And I'm just using the kids as one of them. Another big one is just the relationship between the genders. One of the real challenges in homosexual men, for instance, is stable monogamous sexual relationships. And I know this because I've talked with gay people who want to stay straight and who want to have, monogamous, long-term committed relationships, but they find that it's very, very hard to find people who do that because the male sexual nature is promiscuous by nature. That's what men tend to be. And women, when men and women come together, there's sort of a balancing act in the way that the, if you want to say over evolutionary time or whatever, have developed, where men and women sort of have a complementary sexual nature that creates some stability in the relationships. Whereas in male and male relationships, you're basically dealing with a whole population of people who have they all have a very similar sexual nature, and it's a very promiscuous sexual nature because that's the way men tend to be.
Well, I mean, I think we need to be a little bit careful though, because it's not as if straight people corner the market on fidelity.
No, but
it's stable marriages. I mean,
the question is one side perfect? The question is promiscuity higher amongst gay men than it is amongst heterosexual men? And I think, from my understanding, is that it clearly is. And I don't think that's a coincidence. It has to do with the fact that men tend to be more promiscuous, generally speaking. Our sexual drives are just different. And so, and I don't necessarily want to debate that the whole time. What I'm saying though is that there are realities that doesn't change if everyone is super nice to you and accepting of you. Having children, everyone can be really nice to you, but you can't have kids. And so on some level, I conclude anyway, that this situation is less than ideal. Just like someone being born infertile is less than ideal, or being born with, you get really bad pain if you run a certain speed. You know what I mean? There are things that people have that are disordered to the ideal. The idea of there being an order and then something being a disorder, right? Disorder only exists if there is order. And so the question is, well, what is the order by which we judge if something is out of that order? And I think basic biological reproduction is part of the order of the universe.
Right, I hear what you're saying, but I mean, here in your scenario, and I'm hoping that you can hear what I'm saying, we're talking about things in this letter that I would find objectionable. This is a big one, because again, I think when we're talking about sexual orientation, we can talk about gay, lesbian, bisexual, straight. I don't think we can talk about diseases and tragedies in sexual orientation and say that this is like the other.
But would you say that there's a sexual order?
What's that?
Would you say that there is a sexual order? Because you can't say that something is a sexual disorder unless that implies that there is a sexual order. So is there any such thing as a sexual disorder?
I mean, I would say that if we're talking about the existence of homosexuality, the reality that some people are gay and some people are lesbian, I would not view that as a disorder. No, it's.
So what? But I guess by what standard are you making that judgment? What is the order to which something falls to where you can say that it is a disorder? Because I very clearly believe that there is a sexual order to things. And my question is okay, if you don't believe, do you believe that anything is sexually disordered?
Well, give an example of something that you might view as sexually disordered.
A brother having sex with his sister, consenting adults.
Yes.
You think that falls outside of a sexual order?
Yes.
Why?
Because we're talking about an incestuous relationship, right? And
Why?
I hear this a lot, and it doesn't come up in your letter, thankfully, but we hear this a lot, and we see things like
Well, and I don't want
homosexuality
to.
and pedophilia, right? People making these equivalents that.
But I'm making it for the sake of understanding if that is disordered sexually.
But they're straight, right? The guy is straight, the girl is straight, their brother and sister, their sexual orientation is still straight. Their sexual orientation isn't disordered. Who
You're
they're
right.
having
That
sex
isn't
with
that isn't the part of that isn't the part of the disorder. The part of the disorder is that even if you're consenting adults, it's morally wrong to have sex with your sister or brother.
But their sexual orientation isn't part of the disorder, right? They're straight.
No, absolutely.
So
I wouldn't say the problem.
Relationship.
I don't think most people would think that the problem with an incestuous relation is that they're straight. The problem is that they're brother and sister, right? But my question is this: by what standard do you judge that is disordered? What is the order that you're holding them to? And is that order arbitrary?
Well, I would say that socially, and hopefully I would argue that I hope that it remains this way, that incestuous relationships are considered
but couldn't someone say, but yeah, someone in the 1920s would have said, and I hope that homosexual behavior remains a social taboo. I mean, are these just arbitrary social taboos that we're coming up with here?
I mean, I'm not coming up with gay and lesbian relationships as being a social taboo, right? So I don't feel like I'm the one that needs to defend it as a taboo. I mean,
I guess
it occurs, it exists. People are living their lives. They're gay, they're lesbian, they're straight, and they're engaging in meaningful relationships. They're finding meaning in their lives through spirituality and religion, and they're existing in these spaces as happily married, even committed gay and lesbian couples. And
yeah, and
it's not like an incestuous relationship. It's not like a disease or a tragedy.
Let me preface something. I agree that a lot of them are very, very happy, and I'm happy for them when they're in those relationships. But this isn't a discussion about what makes you comfortable and happy and not have to deal with things. This is fundamentally a question about ultimate ideals. It's a question about God. It's a question about, is there a moral order to the universe? And if so, what is that order, and does X, whatever X is, conform to that, right? And so I want to find out what the limits are, if there are any, to sexual behavior, right? And if I have a very, people know exactly what and why I have particular lines around sexual behavior, and it's all there. What I want to see is from the other side is like, okay, so if you guys think that there is such a thing as sexual disordered behavior or things that are wrong, like, where's that line? And I just queued up a video that I want to watch with you and get your thoughts on.
Sure.
Have you ever heard of Blair Osler?
Yeah.
So Blair has her book, Queer Mormon Theology, and I actually want to watch a clip from this, and then discuss a little bit. So let me real quick pull this up, and then we can watch it here. Let me. While
you're doing that, I'm going to try to adjust my lighting here just a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. But here, we'll play it so you can just look.
Both plural marriage and gay marriage should be enthusiastically welcomed by Latter-day Saints as a symbol of commitment to the doctrine of eternal marriage. Under the queer polygamy model, plural marriage may include multi-gendered partnerships, such as sealings among sister wives that may or may not allow sexual relations between them. If a man is married to two women and the women are bisexual, they may choose to be sealed to each other and have a romantic and sexual relationship with each other, as well as with their common husband.
But Blair's okay. So queer polygamy, is that something that would fall under? Is that sexually disordered, or is that within your? Is that problematic in any way?
I mean, I would want to learn from people who are in those relationships, their experiences with those relationships. I mean,
so you would judge it based on how much they enjoy
long
them.
History of polygamy, and we read different writings historically from both sides of that experience, right? I would want to know, for the people who are in those experiences, what this means for them.
But why does that have any bearing on the moral legitimacy of it? I mean, would I want to go to the Nazis and find out, like, how is this whole Nazi thing working for you guys? Like, is that the way that we judge the morality of behavior?
Well, I mean, the Nazis are harming other people against their will. If we have people in a polygamous relationship, queer or straight, I mean,
so as long as the relationship is not hurting,
harming other people, I mean, I think we can look at the straight polygamous relationships that exist today in the fundamentalist LDS church and recognize that there's some deeply problematic things that are occurring there with respect to power and control. And
so what we're saying, just so I can kind of see here, the problem isn't necessarily the polygamy. The problem is power and control. And so if they were able to have polygamous relationships that had equality, it'd be fine.
Well, I would want to learn a little bit more, to be honest. I can't give you a yes or no answer on that right now, but we want to be careful, I think, getting into this issue, especially because the LDS Church has a history of polygamy that is believed to have been God ordained, and then God stopped it. I mean, the church has never come out and said polygamy was wrong. In fact,
I don't believe it was.
The president of the church and the first counselor are going to have multiple wives in the eternity. So I don't think, in a Mormon context, even, we can say that polygamy is wrong.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't believe we can. Latter-day Saint who says that polygamy is immoral, like universally, is wrong. I just don't understand.
Yeah, because it's going to exist, right? I mean, in Mormon doctrine, it's going to exist eternally. God is a man with at least one wife, or maybe more. I mean, I guess tend to believe more.
There is some areas of speculation there that I don't necessarily.
Well, sure, it's all speculation. But
I guess what I'm wondering is on what ground, like, what if you said you want to go and like learn from these people and their experience with it, like, what would they be able to tell you about their experience that would convince you that it was morally okay?
Well, I mean, I know people who are in polyamorous relationships, and personally, that is not the type of relationship that I would want to be in for myself. But people who are
but is it a matter
of relationship and committed to one another, what right do I have to say, no, you absolutely can't do that, you need to stop that right now, and you all need to separate, and you need to live apart from each other and no longer be in this relationship? I guess I'm feeling like we get back to this idea of the right to self-determination. Now, this is a far different discussion than what a religious teaching might say about it.
Well, but so here's a thing that I would say if we want people to ultimately reach their ultimate well-being, the loving thing to do is to help them to find ultimate well-being, right? And if I approach someone and say, hey, man, you self-determination, whatever path you want, but I know that there are paths that lead to better outcomes and to, higher levels of well-being. I'm not being loving. I'm being apathetic. I'm being the exact opposite of loving. To love someone is to will their good. It's to will that they move towards some higher level of being. To just say, well, self-determination, that's the opposite of love. That's apathy. If you believe that their behavior actually will lead them down a bad path and a dark path. But ultimately, it sounds like when it comes to sexual behavior, it very much is, as long as the people involved are fulfilled and happy, then who cares? Consenting adults, there is no sexual order beyond that of consenting adults who love one another and are all mutually in agreement that this is a beneficial sexual, arrangement. Is that?
Well, I always want to be very careful not to say that I know what's in your best interest because I have this belief system and it tells me that what you're doing is not in your best interest. You hear what I'm saying? So,
but you do that. You do that with someone who's being a bigot, and you do that with someone who is harming other people. Someone
who's harming somebody else. We're getting back to harm to someone else. Harm to another person.
If my harming of another person,
if I'm saying to you that my God doesn't like you wearing, a shirt and tie on Sunday, and I feel like that's detrimental to your salvation, well, that's my belief system in my God, and what difference does it make to you what my belief system in my God tells you that you should be doing?
Well, if there are laws that govern someone's well-being, like the laws of physical health, right? Like, is it good to tell someone just eat whatever you want, like, whatever, and that what they're doing is going to lead them to horrible outcomes physically in their health? I mean, that's not loving. That's apathetic. I'm trying to be popular with people, therefore I won't tell you the truth, which is that you're on your way to harm and to, diabetes and other things. At some point you have to say, like, look, I know this is quote unquote your choice to self-determination to eat whatever you want, but if you want to be happy, you ought to stop eating what you're eating, because it's going to destroy your life, and you don't live in a vacuum. Like, it's also going to hurt other people around you. And so there is an order that allows us, that if we conform to that order, that will allow for better physical health. What I'm saying is that I believe that there is an order to all things that can produce ideal outcomes, not only for an individual, but for all people. And that order plays out over an eternal cosmic time scale. And so I guess I'm just trying to figure out, like, I guess I just find that I think there's more of an order to sexuality than simply, hey, consenting adults.
Well, when I think of I mean, and this is kind of going back to what we talked about a little bit ago. I mean, in terms of, and I don't want to go in circles here, but when we're talking about a person's sexual orientation, and we're making equivalence with tragedies and diseases, right? Those things aren't equivalent.
Can I real quickly let me try and clarify that a little bit, because obviously that's something that's important. So the idea here is that there's no equivalence between muscular dystrophy, which someone develops during the process of their fetal development, and someone maybe developing something in their fetal development. We don't know exactly, but let's just say that something in our fetal development is what causes people to have a particular sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's my perspective on it. In fetal development, something happens where a person develops their sexual orientation. And in this case, it develops in a way that they are attracted to members of the same sex. My point is that union, that the fulfillment of those sexual urges has no possibility in reproduction. A person who is born because of development in the womb, something didn't develop right, and therefore they cannot have children, they do not have sperm or eggs or whatever, and they're never going to have children. I would look at those two scenarios and I would say both of these have the same outcome, which is detrimental and is contrary to the order of creation, which is to say that these aren't just things that happen, but they actually stop the order of biological production and therefore are detrimental. So I'm not equating, believe me, I would, if I had a choice between my child getting muscular dystrophy or my child being attracted to members of the same sex, I'm choosing attracted to the same sex.
Right. So this gets back to the letter then, right? I mean, and I hear what you're saying. So we're talking about areas of the letter that I feel like are problematic. That would be one of them. I think we got to be really careful when we start to make
and
those
maybe,
kinds of,
maybe I didn't.
We're talking about people who are probably already feeling kind of vulnerable. And now I'm coming to you and you're telling me, well, it's here with diseases and tragedies. And I don't think that was your intent, but we see these types of equivalents come up quite often, and they are problematic.
Yeah.
Right? So
I think that maybe I could word that better or be more clear, but I hope I kind of clarify it here that I'm not equating those on a level of their severity. I'm just saying that I believe that there is a sexual order, and I believe that certain things can happen in our development that make it more difficult for us to conform to that order, and or make it like incredibly painful to even want to conform to that order. But the deeper question is there an order? And by what standard do we say there's any sexual order at all that isn't just mere social convention?
Well, clearly in LDS doctrine, there's an order. I think you've made that case.
But I guess that's my question but you seem to imply that you still believe that there's an order. And I'm asking, on what basis do you base that order?
No, I'm not saying there are people who are gay, there are people who are straight, there's people who are bisexual, there's people who are lesbian, right? And I'm not saying, and I guess by order, are we talking like rank order, one is superior than the other?
Yes. As in a hierarchy of value, as in a structure in which we say that one thing is greater than another. It is better to be able to have children than to not be able to have children. And I'm perfectly fine with saying, yes, that is true. It is better to have the ability to produce biological offspring than it is to not. If not, I mean, to me, if you don't have the ability to produce offspring, and if that was universalized, then everything would end.
People have the ability to produce offspring in a variety of ways. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that they're not coming together as a couple producing a child, right? Mm-hmm. The two men aren't coming together as a couple and producing a child without some type of outside, intervention.
It's entirely impossible to create a true biological offspring
from those two people.
Yes.
Yes.
And not only that, even if we found a way to genetically engineer a way to combine their DNA that produces a fetus that, I don't know, somehow through a surrogate or something, and it is actually their biological offspring, I would still say that you have a problem, because I believe that there is a masculine and feminine nature that is inherent in our souls that are intended to be combined into that new life that's created. I am a mixture of the masculine and the feminine natures. Now, we all are to some extent. What I'm saying is that men tend to have a particular, and I'm speaking very much in spiritual kind of terms, that the male masculine nature, and I'm not saying men are 100% masculine, we're all a mix, but the union of those two, the harmony, the interplay between those is, as I rank order things on the ideal, right? That's part of the highest and best and the ideal.
Yeah, see, and I'm not rank ordering things in that way. I mean, obviously this is where we would differ. I mean, I look at my relationship with my spouse, and as a couple, male, female, I'm not saying that it's better than a relationship between a gay couple or a lesbian couple who are committed to one another. I'm not rank ordering my relationship and saying it's up here and yours is down here.
Would you rank order if your relationship was if your relationship has the ability to have children and another relationship does not have the ability, you think that those are totally moral? They're totally equal. If you and your wife had the ability to have children and you guys wanted children, but you didn't have the ability, you would not see that as any better or worse of a situation than if you could or if you couldn't. It's just kind of is what it is.
For me personally, it would be, and for my wife as well, obviously that would be very difficult for us if we were unable to have children. But I wouldn't look at another couple who are able to have children, or at least I hope I would not. And if I did, I would hope that I could get the appropriate support to recognize that that doesn't devalue my relationship, right? That some straight couples can have children and some straight couples cannot have children for biological reasons or whatever. I'm not rank ordering those.
I would look at those and I would say, yeah, it's my relationship's situation is less than ideal, because ideally,
and I would like to be able to have children, right?
See, but now you're setting up an ideal. Now, I agree. I'm not saying you go and like look at people and like, oh, you guys can't have kids, like, rare. But the reality is that you know that if you could wave a magic wand and allow that couple who does not have the ability to have children, if you could wave the wand and allow them to have children, would you do it?
If they wanted to have children.
If they didn't want to have children, would you still give them the ability and the option to be able to? You would, because you recognize that it's better to be able to have children, to have that option available to you than not. And from a Latter-day Saint perspective,
to have children. Okay. No, I was going to say if a couple does not want to have children, I'm not so sure that I'd want to wave a magic wand and enable them to have children if they really don't want to have children, because I think it's really important that people who want to have children have children.
I guess I'm talking about the nature and the ability to, because if they have the ability to, now they could, if they wanted to, at some point change their mind, they would have the ability to. And so I guess, again, but I think this is all coming back to the same thing.
I guess what I'm wondering is, I don't picture knowing that and knowing gay couples and lesbian couples, some who have children, some who don't have children. I'm not picturing them wandering around feeling like there's some significant deficit in their lives because together with their partner, they're unable to produce a child.
Okay. Do you know any heterosexual couples who feel like they're missing something because they can't have a child?
And want to have children together?
Yes.
Sure. And it's them wanting to have a child together.
And so, and you don't think that
the reality of their circumstances.
Do you think that there are homosexual couples that if they had the ability to have a child together, that is something that they want, but that right now they don't have the ability to do?
Sure. There may be. But I think, again, we're looking at individual people's circumstances and their desires. And I want to be really careful not to just paint with a broad brush here and rank order these.
Well, I'm not rank ordering. Here's one thing I want to be very careful about, because someone listening to this might have the wrong impression. I'm not sitting here saying that couples that can't have children are quote unquote less than couples that can, as if their inherent worth as individuals or as a couple are in any way dependent on their physical circumstances. But what I'm saying is, from the perspective of physical circumstances, it's better to, like, there's a reason people are sad when they find out that they can't have children.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And it's because it isn't just because, oh, this is something that I wanted to do. It's probably the most innate and deepest biological thing that a living creature has. And so to not have that ability when you long for that and you want that, that's a very tragic event. Like, something has gone wrong here, and they know that it's gone wrong, and that's why they cry about it. And for us to trivialize that and say that there's no difference between having the ability to have kids and not, that's just dishonest.
Well, and I don't think I'm trivializing it. I think what I'm suggesting is that we allow people to have their experience, right? And
well, hold on. Allow people to have their experience. Like, people can have their experience. Are you saying we should not morally judge them?
You're saying there's an order to this, and that the highest and the ideal is this thing over here, this straight couple that together can produce this offspring, right? And I completely understand where that's going within the context of Mormon doctrine. But even
within biology, though.
Right, but understanding also that I think it's really important that, well, first I think it's really important that gay couples and lesbian couples have an opportunity to express their own experience with regard to this. Because I would imagine there are some out there who may feel some loss around that not being able to, but also understanding that if we're talking about someone who has been experiencing same-sex attraction, right, being gay or lesbian from a very young age, the idea of having children may be something that they've already realized is just not something that they want, not something that they're going to pursue, not something that they're interested in, and it's not going to be a reality for them. Or maybe some will decide, well, I'll have children in other ways. I think it's important that we let people share their own story and their own experience with that, because it is very personal. And I don't want to be
none of these.
This one is better than this one because this one can produce children and this one can't.
So let me. So I think, again, it keeps coming back down to this idea of there being a sexual order, right? And what is the nature of that order, and what is the limits of that order? I actually want to bring back real quick another little segment from Blair's video, because again, I'm interested to find out from people who advocate for gay marriage and things like that. Like, I want to understand if there's any reason that they wouldn't endorse Blair's argument, because I actually think Blair makes a very compelling argument as to where this sort of logically leads. So here, I'm gonna play this clip real quick.
The text beautifully and prophetically states, disability, death, or other circumstances may necessitate individual adaptation. Extended families should lend support when needed. This sentence explicitly states that there are other circumstances which require individual adaptation. Other circumstances could also include a trans woman married to a cisgender woman. The trans woman may have identified as a man prior to her transition, but after she transitions, the couple's biological offspring could have two mothers. Think of it. Trans women show us that there are ways a lesbian couple can have their own biological offspring. Other circumstances could include a mixed orientation marriage of an asexual man and heterosexual woman who is impregnated by a sperm donor. Depending on the anatomy of the persons involved, a transgender man and a cisgender man can already reproduce their own biological offspring together. Transgender men who desire fatherhood as gestational dads can even nurse their babies in a practice called chest feeding. Eventually, uterus transplants may allow transgender women to gestate children too. It seems fitting for individuals who were assigned male at birth to aspire to motherhood when Latter-day Apostles teach the highest and noblest work in this life is that of a mother.
So my question is is there any violation of a sexual order in what Blair's talking about? Because it seems to me that Blair's sort of thesis is that there is no sexual order beyond that of consenting adults who genuinely love and care and take care of each other. Do you see anything wrong with what she just was talking about?
I guess, to just be brief, I really don't get bent out of shape over these things. I mean, to be quite honest, it doesn't stress me out. It doesn't keep me up at night.
But so none of those would violate any sort of a moral order related to human sexuality, from your perspective.
No.
Okay. And I actually, to be totally honest, I think that I admire the consistency, because what I don't like is when people are like, oh, gay marriage, but queer polygamy, no. Or, a trans, that kind of a situation that she was just describing in that last video, like, oh no, not that. And then I always have to ask, like, well, why? Like, on what basis are you saying that this sort of a sexual, let's call it a marginalized sexual identity relationship, why is this marginalized sexual identity valid, but not this other one where you have a bisexual who, in order to fulfill their nature as a bisexual and who they really are, would require to be able to have a sexual relationship with both a man and a woman, right? Otherwise, they're denying, 50% of who they are, as Blair, as a bisexual woman, talks about. Yeah. So I guess as I look at that sort of dynamic, I admire the fact that you're consistent with it, because
I was really brief there in saying no. I mean, I've read Blair's book, and it was after I had left the church, and I mean, my thinking with respect to Blair's book was that's an awfully tall order for Mormonism to someday accept. And it just.
But you predict that one day the church will move to accept same-sex marriage.
Yeah, if you take a look at the long view of history, yeah, I think so.
So let's keep going the longer view of history. Is there any reason that the church wouldn't endorse what Blair's talking about? Is Blair one day going to be a prophetess, as it were, of the early days who saw this coming long in advance?
I doubt that, because I don't know that Blair would live that long.
Well, even when she's gone, maybe long years past, 150 years from now, when they're doing transgendered sealings in the temple with a throuple, will they look back and say, like, look at Blair, like she was one of the key reformers to change the church to align it with the true principles.
Yeah, maybe they will, right? We're kind of laughing here.
If they were logically consistent, they would.
I don't know, right? I mean, the things change, organizations change. And I think we've seen quite a bit of change. And we'll likely see more.
Anyway, anything else before we wrap up?
No, I think we better wrap it up there. We've gone 2 hours, so.
Well, it's been a fun conversation. Yeah, I'm glad that you came on.